Good morning, very early morning for you.
Yeah, it's a little bit.
As Jason,
I can't talk. I haven't had enough coffee.
Well, you better get some, because this is going to be exciting. Or we can see if you don't need coffee, maybe like intellectual stimulation can wake you up, and we will just do all the live streams at 6 a.m. from now on. You'll love it, won't you?
That would be a choice. All right.
Oh my goodness. Well, welcome to episode 7 of season 10 of Disasters Deconstructed. Also known as probably the most chaotic podcast ever. But here we are. So a couple of weeks ago, we were talking about Latin America and the Caribbean, because now we're focusing on regions rather than themes that we've explored in our Contemplating Catastrophe book.
Yes, indeed. And our book, so it's all progressing. This whole season is related to reading and thinking through different ways to contemplate catastrophes. And we're excited that we have so many different disaster scholars who've different perspectives on how they do their work, and drawing on all these different threads of knowledge and tradition, and based on different regions at this point. And we're excited to talk about Japan today.
Yeah, sure. And of course, we talked about Japan quite a lot over the last 10 years. Last 10 seasons. It hasn't been that long. 6 years.
Almost
10 years. Maybe we can have like a 10th year anniversary party. But okay, so I digress as always. So anyway, we're focusing on Japan today. We talked a lot about Japan because there is kind of a lot of interesting stuff happening in terms of very normative disaster risk reduction, but also some of the things that are not covered in literature, and we sort of explore with our colleagues and friends. And I think today will be one of those episodes that we will probably all learn something new, because our guests today are familiar to you all. They've already been on the podcast quite a few times, and surely you love their work as much as we do. Wes Cheek, Chris Gomez, welcome back.
Hi, good morning. Hi.
Great. Good evening, Chris, who is in Japan, of course. Good morning, very early morning to Wes, who is in the US. So yeah, thanks for joining us. Quick introductions, although I don't think introductions are needed. But Chris Gomez is a professor at Kobe University, where he leads the Sabo Laboratory. His research aims to break the boundaries between disciplines to provide more appropriate responses to sediment-related hazards and disaster risk in the face of climate change and population change. And his work mainly focuses on Indonesia and Japan, and his research is grounded in the Manifesto for Ethical Disaster Risk and Risk Research. And of course, Chris is one of my favorite people to talk to. We've recently met in Osaka and had the longest coffee conversation, after which Chris missed his train, which is entirely my fault. But here we go. So thanks for joining us, Chris.
No, that was perfect. I was very happy missing that train, because I missed a few hours of those meetings at the university. That was just perfect.
It was great. Yeah, thanks for that. And then Wes Cheek. Well, Wes is our favorite comrade, and we've been talking to so much. Wes is an assistant professor in the emergency management program at the Massachusetts Maritime Academy, and his research focuses on community involvement in post-disaster reconstruction and the intersection between urban theory and disaster research. And Wes once was introduced as a disaster socialist rather than disaster sociologist.
Sure.
That remains to be my favorite introduction. I think this is the most accurate. Disaster socialist is the most accurate introduction ever.
Well, I'm not sure we can say that out loud anymore. I might lose my government job. We'll see.
Oh, I'm sorry about that.
I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. I'm in Massachusetts. It's okay.
Okay, fine. And Wes's book, What is Community? Post-Disaster Recovery in Minami Sanriku, Japan, is coming out very soon. And I'm waiting for my signed copy, just,
Yep, me too.
Welcome both.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, welcome. Yeah, I don't know. As someone in Florida, I should say the views of my guests do not represent my. No, just kidding.
Exactly. They can revoke
my
my
guest
Florida
and my
driver's license.
co-host.
Okay, so
Oh man.
in this season, obviously, we are exploring, like, through the book, through people's essays, exploring like why you how you got to where you are in terms of your thinking about disasters and some of the main inspirations for your scholarship, because we're all like so different. We've come from different traditions and found different people that inspire us. So we're starting all of these episodes in season 10 with a question to that effect. Like, why is it important to read outside of disaster studies? How did you start reading the stuff that you do, and what inspires you? Can we start with you, Chris, for this one?
Yep. I'm not quite sure I have much time to read anymore, but recently I've been going back to Hobbes and the Leviathan. And right now I'm at the end of the section which is called Of Man. And that's the place where he starts to lay what are the different rules to get people to live and work together to create actually this social contract. And how I got there is like I got this amazing PhD student, Mélodie Dumont, who's in France, co-supervising with colleagues there. And we worked together in South Japan in the 2017 sediment hazards and disaster, what they call it here, that struck after heavy rainfall, whatever. And the interesting part is like the government came in with all the concrete factory at the back and restarted to build walls and Sabo dams, those huge dams, to stop sediments in an area where basically, well, nobody is there anymore because they have asked the population to leave and the population don't want to come back, but they still pour a lot of money in there. And right now in Japan, that's what they used to do in the 1970s, 80s, and they've been criticized a lot for pouring too much concrete over everything they could pour concrete on. And they try to go into the more green type of engineering. But in that valley where nobody is and where nobody can see, they're still, and they've been criticized for it, they are still using those same old methods where you go and put as much concrete as you can. Well, the funny part is that it's failing. But the interesting part of it is like, why does the government feel compelled to take such drastic action? Why they still do that? It's not because they have a lot of money. It's not the case in Japan anymore. We are kind of like at the end of an era almost from this. And I was starting to think, why do they come here? And that's when I started to ask the question, well, what is the contract between those local population? What are the original contract? And then like digging and back, I went to different type of contract and social contract. And I went to now Hobbes and started to ask, well, what is the imperative of the sovereign on its constituent? At what point does a disaster become a breaking point for those social contract? And that's why I'm in there right now. So I've been reading into different type of social contracts. And it's pretty interesting actually to look at it from a different perspective. I'm sure we have all read that book, but like everyone, especially I'm almost close to 50 now, I tend to forget more things than I learn things now. So it's important to get back and read those a bit more in details. Then that's about all. Otherwise, I read maybe some cartoons sometimes. That's about all. I enjoy making them and reading those.
That's great. Thanks so much, Chris. Wes, what about you?
So what was the question? What am I reading lately? Or what
inspires your work? What are you reading?
I think what inspires my work and what I'm reading lately are probably two different things. But I find what I'm reading lately is because I finally have time to like choose to read stuff. And I'm reading a lot less theory these days, and I'm reading more like long form history stuff that I find interesting. Like I just read a history of the Battle of Hue during the Vietnam War, like 1968. And I've been reading Trotsky's autobiography, which is really, really good because he's a great writer. But it's interesting to read those with the being informed by doing the whole, decade of grad school reading theory forever, because like, you're reading the Battle of Wei, and it's told, the one I'm reading anyway, very much from an American perspective, even though I think it's a good American perspective of, oh, this horrible tragedy, but it seems to gloss over all of the, larger issues going on about colonialism and who has a right to fight this fight, and all of the class issues and all of those things. So it's really interesting going back and kind of reading these kind of dad dad gets for Father's Day history books with kind of the leftist grad school theoretical viewpoint. So I've been reading a lot more of that stuff lately than I've been reading the theory that inspired me when I was getting into all of this. But now I feel like it's all kind of, the backstopped by theory, where when I read this, I'm like, oh yeah, of course these people are fighting you. Why would they not be fighting you over their city, right? And then you read about, it's funny because you read about like, yeah, how were they able to do these things? How were they able to transport like munitions by hand over, hundreds and hundreds of miles? And it kind of glosses over, well, they actually believed in what they were doing. They were actual anti-colonial forces who were reading and thinking. And it's funny in this book, they're kind of ridiculing the North Vietnamese because they have these traveling drama actors who come around and give them these plays about communism, and they're kind of like, isn't that weird? But it's like, yeah, but also you're having, 1 million people inspired to like fight a war with like substandard technology by all of this stuff that's going on. So I think that's what I've been reading lately, or things like that.
I feel like there is a book in it for you, sort of, a theorist view on Dad's history books, or something like that.
That would be the exact thing that I should do.
There you go.
Thank you for that idea.
Yeah, they're full of ideas as always. so
Thank you. We're always giving me a new book to write, so that's good.
Of course, that's what I'm here for.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, let's talk about our book that Jason and I have been kind of spending so much time on, that's hopefully be coming out next year. And of course, both Chris and you, as you've written entries for us. So Chris, I'd like to start with you and your entry. You wrote about Masao Akagi, and that was one of the kind of the most most different entry, I guess, from everybody else. So do you want to tell us why you chose Masao Akagi as your thinker?
Okay, so as you said in introduction, like my lab is about sabo, which in Japanese is made of two terms or two signs. Sa is the sand or the sediment, and bo is everything which is about stopping, protecting. So that's the main theme I'm working on. And Masao Akagi is named as the father of sabo in Japan. When you go to the Sabo library in Tokyo, his desk is there, almost like a relic you can touch if you want to, like you have come to the holy saint of Sabo. So I could hardly not talk about him. Maybe from an engineer perspective, that would be the case. But I was very interested in sharing him because, yeah, he's not that well known overseas. And coming from a field of like more environmental science, physical geography, geomorphology, as what I was like doing during my PhD and my early years in my career, I thought that integrating and trying to embrace more what my colleagues in human geography and social science were doing sometimes was really difficult at first, because I thought that the access to theories is sometimes very difficult. And one thing that I've tried to do in the work that I've done and that we've done together is not to make it as an intellectual work, but try to acknowledge different walk of life kind of approaches. And I think that Akagi-san does that. He has had a huge impact on hazards and disaster risk in Japan, because he was working for a long period at the government. He is one of the few who got a medal of recognition for the government for his work protecting population in Japan. Whether we agree or not, whether like having those Sabo Dam and those huge concrete structures is the right way of doing it is another question. But at least he made a contribution, which is not a contribution like which is directly out of, let's say, the university bench. It has a more popular approach as well, in the sense that having a Sabodam in a community was involving the full community in like building it, thinking it, where to place it, and even now those. The relation between the Sabodam in Japan and in the West is very different. When we are saying, oh, it's horrible, those things are defigurating the landscape. I've been so many times in the field, people telling me, if that structure was not there, my house was gone, and I was gone in the night with the house and the debris and everything that were coming through. So there is this view also in Japan that those structures are not that bad. And at the same time, you have to remember that since 1952, when the US pushed more or less the government of Japan as being what it is now, since 1952 until present, only 1 year, we had a more leftish government. I would not say lefts because it's like middle, center, right, but not as far right as we have had so far. And this stability has been propelled notably by this old concrete industry. So that concrete industry that creates wall, maybe Wes will talk better than I in the Sanriku area about those famous wall and the repeats of the wall that sometimes have created more hazards and helped the disaster more than anything else. But those have helped actually the economy and keep the economy stable for many years in Japan, even in the countryside. So there is a whole narrative behind it between that guy, Akagi-san, who was developed those Sabodam. When I say Sabodam, it's check dam in English, check dam to stop sediment. And those have created communities, created groups, kept the economy alive in the countryside when the agriculture was just not enough to make money anymore. And it has also compelled the government, if they wanted to keep their job, basically, to construct those different structures here and there. Sometimes they're absolutely useless, but people will keep their job, keep having the money flowing in the countryside, so they would keep voting for them. So there is this whole system at the back that makes it a very Japanese system altogether. So that's maybe why I chose him.
That's super interesting, because that was, I think this is the only thinker who was kind of, more technical rather than the usual sort of philosophy pedagogy. And your entry is the only one that doesn't contain references, because we have asked everyone to suggest the reading by the thinker. And when we're talking about it, and actually, as a side note, the discussion on the margins of any draft of the paper is my favorite genre. Like, I feel that those need to be published with all of you, actually. I enjoy writing on the margins with all of you. And so you made an excellent point on the margins. You said that the documents that Agaki produced are engineering drawings and, different computations. And so we wouldn't be able to reference them in a way that we're used to reference in books, for example, or papers. But you also pointed out that human expression certainly goes beyond mere words, right? And there are so many varieties of modalities of the discourse, and we as academics produce them, and different disciplines produce different modalities. And maybe this chapter is a good opportunity to acknowledge that. So how do we tackle this kind of variety of modalities in knowledge production, and how do we acknowledge this?
You're asking me. I came here for easy question, not for that.
Well,
No, I'm just kidding. Well, that's I think the difficulty. I would like to go back to what I was just saying earlier, like coming from a rather different field. Even if I felt that just looking at geomorphology or science surface processes was not going to save anyone anymore, or if it has at any time. But piercing into a different group is always the difficulty. And like I often look at it as different churches, you know, like you have the holy priest, the priest who hold the Bible, and like the holy words that you have to use, and this or that theory that needs to be in there if you want to get published. And this is just among the scientists. So that we need to be able to break. To be honest, when I started to work with you, with JC Gaia as well, some of the comments we got from outside, from also when we tried to publish in a philosophy journal, I thought that they were just so close-minded. I expected something totally different, actually. I expected people to be a bit more open to different ideas and different way of looking at things. So I think that the first thing we need to do is to change the way we work. The other thing is that we try too hard to relate to one current of thought or another current of thought. It's I think really difficult for non-academic or for non-academic production to shine, because it's like we have done, I didn't say it earlier, but I've been reading quite a lot of Gilles Deleuze also recently. And it's like the space is all striated. And Gilles Deleuze was saying that, well, it's still moving underneath at the same time. So like those striations are not forever. But I feel it's really hard actually to like erase those striations to do something different, or to let the nomad go through this when you're not part of already that institution. So I think we need to break those boundaries already. And unfortunately, academics are very good at creating them, creating what we want in the mold, and trying to break those is essential if we want to have different modes of communication that are more inclusive in general.
Super.
Now, like
Thanks,
now
Chris.
you all hate me, so like I can go. Is it the time I leave?
No, that's great, Chris. So I want to come to you, Wes, and you wrote 2 entries for us actually in the book, and one is of course for Marx, and I think that was already allocated to you before we even invited any other authors.
Yeah.
That's very nice.
ours-
That happened. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah. But the second one I want to talk to you today about, which was Osugi Sakai, and why did you write about him?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm trying to remember what the first thought I had on that was, and I don't remember it. And I think that in hindsight, his I'm not exactly sure how to describe his companion in life, Ito Noe, might have been a more interesting figure, although they're both very interesting figures. But I wanted to choose someone who was kind of like not in the current mainstream of thought, but that was in an interesting moment in Japanese history. In the Taisho period, which is right between the Meiji and the Showa, which we think of as more historically relevant, was a really interesting, turbulent period in Japanese history where kind of what would come next was being decided, right? And it was this moment when it wasn't yet decided that Japan was going to be an imperial authoritarian state that tried to wage war on the rest of the world. There was this slight opening there where it might have been a lot of different things. And Osugi Sakai was pushing for it to be something entirely different. He was pushing for it to be, well, at one point he wanted to make alliance with the Soviet Union and become communist. And then after reading a lot and going to prison a lot, he wanted to be, he was an anarchist, a diehard anarchist. And so he was kind of, and this is, he was a leader during this period, but this was not an unusual pathway for a lot of leftists at that point in Japan. And they would eventually lose out to the authoritarian militarists, but not intellectually. They would lose out by being just massacred by this authoritarian state. And very interesting for us, Osugi Sakai and Ito Noe were massacred during the Kanto earthquake, right? And so in the kind of, well, I almost said chaos, but it wasn't really chaos. It was very organized. In the immediately following the Kanto earthquake, there was this huge retribution on the part of the state deliberately to kill off ethnic Koreans and leftist intellectuals, right? And so they kind of used the cover of of the Kanto earthquake to just massacre people. And by numbers, ethnic people who had been Korean nationals who were living in Japan were lynched and killed in the streets on the order of the government. But also leftists were rounded up, imprisoned, and then Osugi Sakae, Ito Noe, and his nephew, who was an American citizen born in Portland in the U.S., were strangled in their jail cells and then thrown down a well. So this was very deliberate targeting. But in his life, Osugi Sakae was a really interesting figure because he was kind of, in some ways, not an exact parallel for Mishima Yukio, who's a lot more well-known and, was one of my favorite writers, for better or worse, who was, they were from these kind of, not kind of fallen samurai families. Like as the samurai was on his way out, you had these elite families who didn't really have a secure place in this new Japan. And oftentimes all they had was really this legacy. They didn't have a lot of wealth. They didn't have a lot of property. And so Osugi Sakae, for parts of his life, thought he wanted to be a military officer. He was sent to military school. He kind of had this streak of rebelliousness. And I should say as well, like he wasn't necessarily a great guy. He had a streak of cruelty as well, but he was obviously very bright. And he took to translation. He read in French and English and maybe even German, I think. And so he was taking in all this information and also doing translations and realized there was a bigger, broader world out there that he wanted to be a part of. So I think he's just a really interesting figure for representing the Taisho era, which we don't think about enough, and the kind of possibilities that were there for a different future for Japan. And none of his writings are like the most incredible writing of his generation. None of them are like, wow, your mind is blown by this new theory. But he was out there trying to think of something new, and he was taking in information from around the world and trying to relay that in Japanese. So I think he's representative of a very underrated historical moment in world history. Because just imagine if Japan had chose to be something that wasn't an authoritarian, militaristic empire in the 1920s and 30s, right? So I think that's my case for why I chose him.
Great. And so just connecting that with your other essay, maybe about Marx, what do you think the influence of Marx is on Japan's radical thinking? And also just how does that translate to the context of disasters?
Yeah, I think I could take the second one better than I could take the first. I think there are people who've written a lot more about Marx's influence on Japan than I have. And clearly it was there. Clearly, like Japan has consistently across its history produced really solid Marxist thinkers and translators. And in Japan, I just found out the other day, the mayor of my wife's hometown, and my wife is from the middle of nowhere, is a Japanese Communist Party, but they have non-party elections locally. And so I didn't know that for all these years. So, Marxism has been hugely influential in Japan, and it's kind of the inverse of the US, where if you go to the economics department at Japanese universities, like the old guys, like the guys who are still hanging on to their jobs, will be like Marxists that were trained in the 60s, right? It's wild. As an American, it's wild. It's completely normal for other places.
For the rest, it's personal.
Yeah, well, like literally. So I think that Marx's influence on that generation was huge. But the connection to the work that we do, I think, and the argument that I try to make is, in disasters, we've made this progress, which again in America we've decided to erase that progress. But we've made this progress in saying that we understand that disasters aren't natural, hopefully, right? And we understand that the important factor, or one of the most important factors in disasters, is our vulnerabilities, right? We talk about vulnerabilities when we talk about disasters being natural, but then it seems like we shy away from filling in the blanks there, which is, okay, well, why are people vulnerable? Like who made them vulnerable? Like, why are they in this? Why do we see some people who aren't vulnerable and others that are? Like, what happened with that? How did that come to be? And then it seems like we're, content to just have that be at the surface level. Like some people live in this area, I don't know, or some people do this. And I don't think you have to be a Marxist to understand this stuff, but I think that Marx helps you understand how power works and how there are winners and losers, and that isn't part of their natural ability as a human being. That's part of kind of the structure of society, especially capitalist society, that there requires to be a very small amount of quote unquote winners and a very large amount of losers. And that if we're trying to understand vulnerabilities, then we need to look there. And if we understand things not being natural, well, it seems like Marx is a great starting place, because he looked at the world and said, this isn't a natural formation that we're looking at here. This is something we've decided to do, and we could just as well do something else. So for me, I don't think you have to be like, hey, Marx got it all right, and Marx has all the answers. And I don't think Marx thought that either. So I think that he's a very great jumping off point for being able to look at the world and say, these are not natural formations that we're looking at, which as disaster researchers, hopefully we've made the step to trying to do that. So that's my Marx argument.
That is a good Marx argument, and that's why I asked you to write about Marx.
Thank you.
And no, it's really great, and I kind of this was precisely the point of the book when Jason and I were kind of thinking about it, right? We wanted to give people a starting point, so they can start thinking further and hopefully engaging with theories and thinkers, people they've never really thought about before. And so also we're asking everyone the same question on this season, and this is the question about hope, because inevitably our conversations end up being quite dark, especially now given the context of everything. So Chris, let me start with you. What is your biggest hope for disaster scholarship and practice?
In Japan or as a whole?
Just anywhere. You can start with Japan and grow.
I think that going back to the problem of capitalist society, Japan is its economy is shrinking because the population is shrinking, and outcomes might not be that great. Like during the Taisho era, one of the reasons why at that time I think we got this hard right government was the fact that during the Meiji period, the opening of Japan was more a response to avoid being invaded by Western nations. So military build-up was on the menu at that time. And once you have all those weapons, you have to use them. It wouldn't be a waste otherwise. Why wasting all of those new tools and toys that you have? Well, they are now in a position where they are accumulating tools again and toys. So I hope that some people will learn from past mistakes, although history shows that it's not the case most of the time. But if we put that aside, the fact that the government, for instance, if I go back to my Sabo, they don't have the money now anymore to keep those and maintain them. There is less. We have seen bridges and the roof of the tunnels on the highway collapsing, just killing people underneath also, because they just don't have enough money, enough manpower to keep that all concrete economy that was in place. So some of us might look at it as like, oh, it's terrible, what are we going to do? At the same time, it gives them the chance to actually look into other directions and think about different ways to tackle disaster risk. And that might be an opportunity. Well, I don't know what Wes think about it. That would be interesting to hear what they think about what is the role of this change in the economic reality in Japan, and how this will have effect on how they deal as a country or as communities even with disasters. But before I continue, what do you think?
Man, I don't know. I should say I'm an exile from Japanese academia, so I don't know that I have my thoughts on it anymore. Like, it's an interesting point right now, because you have the rise of the slight rise of a far right party happening in Japan right now with Sanseito, which is partly powered by saying we don't want more foreigners in our country, which I think is a complicated issue having to do a lot with the mismanagement of the tourism boom in Japan, but is going to reflect back on people, on immigrants, also as the father of 2 kids with dual citizenship.
Yeah.
I think that the choice to maintain having to choose a nationality when you turn 20 is a great mistake. So I think there's a possibility for Japan to say, we're going to, open up to more immigration. We're going to open up our economy. People can work in official jobs here and have dual citizenship. I think that's finally on the table, but I think that you're also at a point where electorally people might push back against that, and Japan becomes more right-wing and more sealed off. And as that developmental state recedes, where the building the road to the village, where the only job in the village is to build roads to the village, when that economy stops functioning, we might see something different entirely, and it might not be great. So I think Japan is again at a point where big decisions are going to get made, and I don't know if they're being made with a real eye to a real future. I worry. But then again, I'm in exile, so when Japanese academia wants these answers from me for real, they can always call me back in.
Yeah, back from here, even the traditional far right that's been in power, they have been hearing the call from the Sanseito, and at the last party election, which has been on TV everywhere here, they have taken on to their own the foreigners issue and trying to contain the number of foreigners. It's very funny because it's just playing on very simple negative feelings that some individuals have in Japan because of over tourism, as you were saying, more than a reality of difficulties. This being said, I've experienced a lot of racism in Japan, so there is. This is still very strong, and it's not going to get better, I'm afraid. But how is this going to impact disaster risk scholarship is an interesting part as well. I was working a couple of years ago with the people from the LGBTQ group in Iwate post-disaster. And what she was saying is that discrimination was an issue. So I can make the parallel with discrimination with foreigners, against foreigners. But she was saying that people who had sex change or like had a different gender, that was what was on their identity card, was like mayhem in those centers that had been placed. So from that perspective, I don't see the catastrophe landing getting in the right direction, especially because Japan has been following more or less what the US does. The rise of Sanseito, and even the late leader of Sanseito was saying that he got those ideas from Trump directly. So this populism that has been rising in the US has directly influenced what you can see in Japan. And this almost, it's almost like it's okay now to be racist or like make racist comment in a lot of context and countries, and that has come to Japan as well, I think. So this all discriminative bubble that has come here will certainly have effect when it comes to catastrophe or disaster risk management.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think we should say sorry to give you Japanese politics updates, but we should say for people who aren't familiar, this party Sanseito is a new party formed expressly saying we like what Trump did in the U.S. And the name of it means like you can participate in politics, right? And so it's telling people like go out and participate and do this. And its main thrust is there are too many foreigners in Japan. Now, as a former resident of Kyoto, and Ksenia witnessed this as well when we were working there, there are too many foreigners in some parts of Japan, but not as residents, right? Not as workers. There is the Japanese government decided to gamble on bringing in as many tourists as possible and increasing that year over year without thinking about the effects on local populations, without planning well, with just saying, let's just throw money at this. And tourism is the greatest neoliberal solution to economic woes. And I should say, for context, during this whole period of the tourism boom in Japan, Kyoto went bankrupt, right? So who I keep asking this question to everyone, who is this tourism boom benefiting, right? If the number one like tourism city in Japan goes bankrupt during the tourism boom, it wasn't helping us. I couldn't even ride the bus to work. It was so crowded. So San Seito is taking people's real frustrations. Now, people in rural Kagoshima aren't feeling the tourism boom. People in Iwate aren't feeling the tourism boom. But there is a real kind of sense that, oh my God, if I go downtown, it's full of Chinese tour groups, right? It's full of white people in Tokyo, right? And so they're capitalizing on that. And if we tie that back into, I know when I was still in Japan, Ksenia, we had talked about in Kyoto writing a paper trying to say, is tourism the disaster? Because we were doing all this. How do we make like these disaster plans for Kyoto? And it was about fire and earthquake. And it was like, well, but what about like this unrestrained like neoliberal economy that's being imposed on a city? Can't we look at that as a disaster? And so I think Japan has not dealt with, other than saying, which they have gotten better at, we should make multiple translations of disaster announcements because we have foreign people here. We should make these news broadcasts easier to understand if it's an emergency, which Japan has improved on a lot. They haven't really done much about how do we think about this tourist boom and what is it actually doing to the structure of society. Because I got to tell you, I lived downtown in Kyoto, and it was rough. It was day-to-day life did become difficult with your.
But let me bring us back to hope, as we're really trying to, finish on positive note here. And we only have 5 minutes to go.
I'm not good at the hope.
Wes, what is your hope for disaster scholarship?
I saw a video, I was watching it this morning, it's probably going around if you're on social media, of there was I think a food delivery guy on a bike in Chicago, and ICE tries to grab him, and he manages to like run away from them on his bicycle. And I found it to be the most hopeful thing I've seen in months. I think if we can all, whatever metaphor you can make of the food delivery guy running away from ICE on his bicycle, if we can all manage that in our personal and professional lives, then I have some hope.
I love this. This is great. This is exactly what I wanted to kind of to finish on. Listen, people, we love we absolutely love talking to you. Please come back. It's just the conversations with you are always so playful but so serious at the same time. So thank you for giving us your time. Thank you for waking up so early and kind of staying at work a little bit later. We really, really appreciate you. And for those of you joining us online today, thanks again. Hopefully you've enjoyed this episode. We certainly did. We will be back in a couple of weeks, and we will stay in Asia. So we will continue talking about the Eastern thinkers. And for now, see you all later.
Bye.
Everyone.
Bye. Bye-bye.